For today, we have the presentation, and the idea of this presentation, why we are talking about and what we are talking about, it's behind the code, so beyond the code. So we will talk about the optimization, the code and architecture. We will talk about the changes in infrastructure, main pitfalls inside the migration of the heavy loaded secured web portal from the on-premise to the Azure, and what we found. So it's like who asked about the channels, etc. My name is Igor Shastitka. I am Microsoft MVP. Also, I am a senior manager of Azure Cloud Operation in Etisalat UAE. My team is exactly responsible for the migration, for the management, etc., the customers to the Azure and managed services after. And so this presentation exactly is a part of our finds, what we exactly found until the migration, what is the main issues, what it could be the blocker of the migration, what should be done after the migration, and after the developers fix the codes or move the codes to the Azure, what also. And by the way, there's a lot of things that you need to fix, you need to work with it, etc. And back to me, so you can find all about me. Yeah, as I told you, I am from Slovakia. I work for Microsoft, like Microsoft Consulting for more than 10 years. Main my positions, like current position, cloud infrastructure architect, senior infrastructure and security consultant, and a lot of another ways. By the way, this is a YouTube channel, and let's go. So, website migration from the Azure to on-premise to the Azure, what could be easier? So, just like a lift and shift, correct? And this is a typical scenario that's by the way, this is a Microsoft presentation before how to migrate the website from the on-premise to the Azure, or from one platform to another platform, from one cloud to the another cloud to the Azure. You can find the really easy way, and maybe you already saw this presentation. It's like a few stages. First stage, it's migrate and rehost. When we do the POC, when we have the two tiers, Azure application and Azure database, it's easiest way. We are doing the migration of the application itself. We are doing the migration of the database by data migration assistant, or by backup backpack files, or etc. We move our data. Maybe you are already familiar with this. It's application service migration assistant. It's easiest way to move it. All of this stuff. This one is screenshot for data migration assistant. If you know that it's failed really often, please be sure that the target database, when you migrate from the on-premise to the Azure, especially big database, please be sure that target database will be on the premium tier, especially not on the premium 1, but premium 5, 6, 8, 10, etc. Because this migration assistant use the multi-request and multi-parallel connectivities, and it's not enough to use with the standard tiers, etc. Please be aware about this. And after that, select the right sizes, and after that, turn on some security that you need to understand to block connectivity. You turn on the backup and disaster recovery, all these basic features you are using, and moving the data. So correct, right? Use the performance analysis, use the DevOps stages, and this is like estimated the prices when you migrate like one S1 instance, small S0 database for the POC, for instances for performance changes, etc., etc. Correct, right? So second stage, it's rebuild. It's really easy too on the presentation that this main goal, it's move from the POC like a lift and shift to the pilot and to the production with performance improvement, with the right way web application worker query worker, and again and again and again. So how it works, will use the blob storage for the static content. We will use the Azure query and functions to avoid long-term operations here. We will use the API application of web jobs if it's required also. We will use Redis cache, of course. We will use the Azure CDN to content distribution. It improves the performance because new architecture, when web application responds fast, it improves the performance for the SQL because we are add the tiering. We improve the performance because we are using the SQL automatic tuning. We are using the function for background task. It again improves the performance. All content static improved because we are using CDN and work with and use Azure automation for scale up. Yeah, plus we add the security, we add all of this stuff as is, and we have again automation like webhooks, we have alerts, we have scheduler to change, for example, the number of instances for auto scaling. We use the auto healing solution to restore the application health or monitor health, and there is estimated cost of this solution. It's really easy on the presentation, and at the end we create the architecture, etc. Hope you know where to find all these scenarios, presentation, etc. But the main question here, it's a pitfalls, and what pitfalls we will have, and how we can optimize our infrastructure, where we will have the issue with the performance, how we can monitor this issue, how we can avoid and handle the problems. This is the main question. So again, move the lift and shift and re-architect, it's easiest part. But first one, database. It's easy. It's database. It's SQL, Azure SQL database. Nothing easier than this service. But first of all, you have to understand that if you are using, especially with the backpack migration database, you know that you can create the database directly, or you can create the database from the backup. You can create the database from backpack. In Azure, hope you're familiar with this stuff. But when you use the backup to move the database, because it's faster, it's easier than use the data migration assistant, etc. Main issue here, and we found it on a lot of projects, the problem with compatibility level. Who is familiar with the compatibility level of the database? You know that in any SQL database, there is a special object on the database level that's named exactly compatibility level. This compatibility level marks database to work exactly with the selected features. Like, for example, you are using SQL 2012, and after that moves the database from the one SQL server to another by backup, etc., etc., etc. You still use not SQL Server 2018 with all features. You still use your old SQL Server 2012 with Z features, because inside your database still compatibility level, and you have to check it and change it after, of course, the testing, etc., etc., to work with it. It's a really big issue. It's our find. We found this at least on the 3 or 4 projects where the customers move the database from the on-premise and still use their old schema, their old compatibility levels. Please be aware about. I will show you the on the next slide the links, and you will find there. After that, please check indexes. Indexes inside the SQL database and inside the Azure SQL database quite different, and you need to check and rebuild it, especially again when you migrate and backup. Maybe you are familiar with MaxDop, maybe not, but again, so it's like a parallelism, parallelism in query, how the your SQL server work with the parallel request and use the multiply cores of the vCores of the virtual machine or physical machine to speed up execution of the system. A lot of recommendation inside some requests on the internet, and we found this exactly on again on a lot of projects, that please set option MaxDop 1. Are you familiar? Not familiar, but anyway, just to know, MaxDop 1, it's not recommended to the SQL. By default, Azure SQL database use it. MaxDop 0. Right now, Microsoft says that please, MaxDop 0 means that SQL database will use all available vCPU. Right now, Microsoft says that if you have some issue with performance, please use MaxDop 6 inside your request with the command like MaxDop option. It's, again, really significant part of the migration and working with the database, because the database, as we found, like, again, most of the cost consuming part of the application. For example, S7, it's $2,000 per month. You use MaxDop 1, and you have DTU like a high utilization with 100%. You switch it to the MaxDop 8, and you will see that your DTU will be dropped to the 80-60%. This is a significant difference. So like it means that you will be able to do more with the same money on the same scenarios. Query execution, again, so like the SQL database and Azure SQL database quite different on the execution. The query, it's not only about MaxDop, and you need to check after any migration how it's executed. And please turn on automatic tuning. Microsoft did a really good job with the Azure SQL database automatic tuning, and it's strongly recommended to turn it on. To have right again indexes to optimize the query execution, etc. After that, please do not do the lift and shift and just start. Please do the POC, because it's really tough to choose right performance pricing tiers. Microsoft provides a lot of scenarios with the pricing and tiering. Microsoft provides the DTU, Microsoft provides vCore. Frankly saying, I every time recommend the DTU scenarios. Why? Because it's easiest to understand how your query will be executed, how much data you will need, how much performance you will need, especially for the POC. Because for vCores, it's not predictable performance. Yes, it's maybe faster, but in terms of performance pricing, in our opinion, in our experience, the DTU will be better, especially after the monitoring and after the right choosing the SOP SKUs between the SQL database choose. If you need really high CPU intensive execution, yes, vCore makes sense. But typically, for the typical web database, we are not talking about the ALAP database, etc. We are talking about the database that uses some already filtered, cleared data, yes, from the corporate database, from anywhere, for the content management system, for the some HR system, whatever you use, but it's not like, again, vCore. It's more about the DTU. And plus, you have to understand that when you move the SQL database to the Azure, what the access way to this database will be published to the internet, and your application will try to connect this database directly through this like publishing points, etc., etc., etc. It creates some access high latency, and you need to check this and avoid this. It's best idea we will talk about to publish this SQL database only by the private endpoint. Yes, again, so it's a balance between a compromise between the performance, security, and price. But frankly saying, again, so like in our experience, in our like projects, the compromise it will be on the part of the private endpoint where you can work with the SQL database. And again, back to the discussion. This is about the compatibility level. You can see the compatibility level and how you can change it. And again, you can get the database compatibility level with the right numbers. Please do this after the presentation. You can find the number. So SQL database recommended to have 150. That means that this is the SQL 2019 right now. So it's why it's important. So like check it and change to right parameters by just execution the command on the any data, etc., etc. Scenarios. This is the first part. Second part, as I mentioned, it's all about the indexes, DTU, etc., etc. This is SQL shots. This is a blog of my colleagues, Depinder Arora. He exactly worked with us on our team with the SQL works, etc. And here, sqlshots.com, and here you can find all of this stuff that will be really important and really need you to check, for example, log files, to check the spaces, to work with the high DTU, to work with the indexes, update the statistics, because because it is important. This is how it works. Please, again, check. But be aware that, for example, rebuild of the statistic or rebuild indexes on the Azure SQL database, it's not recommended to be to do on the production or on the working hours. It could take up to night, let's say. Or upgrade the level, SKU level of the solution before work it. Just a second, I will put it. So please take attention. Plus max DOP. The technology of MaxDop really describe it here. I mean, on the Azure SQL database, and look for the from the unlimited to 8. This is it was changed on the July this year. Please read carefully, understand, and use it. And do not use 1, 2, 3, etc., because for the database, again, Microsoft says it's like use the MaxDop with 8 or 0. And the last one, query execution automating tuning. It's a short demo. Hope you are using this, but if you don't using, please be aware that there is intelligence performance on the SQL database. Any Azure SQL database has the right options, and there you can find the performance overview. With the parameters, with the using of the DTUs, etc. There is performance recommendations that happened last time. There is automatic tuning with the configuration, and the most important part, it's a part of the query performance insight, where you can check and configure all needed parameters. So this is the top queries you can configure again here with the settings, custom, how many you want to see, what you want to see, etc., filtering. So for example, if we're talking about the CPU most utilization, we can find that this is the query ID executed 13,000 time for last 24 hours, and it makes the most of the utilization. And you can check this query, you can look on it, you can understand what's happened, when it happened, how long it was executed, etc. This is one of the tool where you can find the performance of the database and what happens with database, plus you can analyze and look on it. So you see it's like some spikes in last hour, but if you look for the 1 days, this is the how we optimize the database from the why it's dropped on November. Wait, it should not be like this. Yeah. So we started optimization with 100%, and after that, you can see that no more than average, let's say, no more than typical 5% plus some big request did not find here. It's interesting, but it's stage, sorry, it's a stage, but anyway. Okay, Q&A. Yep. Okay, so if you have any questions, please ask me, but I want to ask your attention for the DB encryption. If you are using the DB encryption for the migration, please decrypt database before, encrypt after, and after that you will be able to encrypt your database with additional key vaults. But you need to understand that if you lost your key vault, you will lost your database and the data. The main issue here in Dubai, in UAE, that you can't use for restoration second key vault. So for example, we have UAE North and UAE Central. If you put key vault on the UAE North and database in UAE North, and you use the encryption from the UAE North key vault, and after that you want to restore the backup of the database on the UAE Central, it looks like easy that database will take the key from UAE North, but it will not work. You will need to copy your keys from UAE North to UAE Central and use the UAE Central copied key and use this key for the second server where you're planning to restore your database. Only this way it will work correctly. Plus, you need to understand that the keys that you are using for encrypt in UAE North or UAE Central could not be exported anywhere to the world, to any other Azure data center. It will just not work. This is the government regulation here in Dubai, here in UAE. So please be aware about this kind of configuration and this kind of the encryption. Second part, main part, right? It's like application services. When you migrate application services from the on-premise or from another platform to the Azure, it's usually monolithic application with legacy code, with no experience of the team how to work on it, again with the high dB access latency because the application work over the public point of the connectivity. There is no infrastructure for monitoring for the inside. Auto healing had at least healing tools. There is no built-in security inside application, and there is no auto scaling inside the application and experience. So all of this stuff you have to add inside your application or do the rebuild application. Do you remember the stage 2? For the rebuilding, it's okay. So it's need to rebuild the code, to use the front end, to use the queue, to use the workers for function, etc., to use the cache database, etc. So all of this stuff is really required, and you have to follow the Microsoft recommendation about the architecture, about the separate static content. You have to move any static content to the blob storage with CDN. It will be separated like images, blob, blah, 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 part of your application, I mean by the full qualified domain name. You need to separate different application domains by application service plans. So in application service, we have application service plans. That's exactly the servers. Inside the servers, you run your application with the number of the instances. And it's really important to understand that if you put a few different critical applications inside one plan, and one of the application will take most of the performance and most of the resources, you will lost your other application, so crash or overloading of the application service plan for one application inside will crash or overload or stop another application. So please plan your application service plan correctly. This is like you can see here that's for critical application, you have different application service plans. Caches must have. And really important, back to the architecture again, separate atomic application, atomic operations as Azure Functions, as web jobs, etc., etc. For example, the functions that's handling the custom errors. We had this issue with the previous code. Just imagine that application changed a lot. The structure of the website changed a lot. It's a lot of different structure that should be maintained by the application inside. I mean that, for example, sometimes it was like articles, after that was a post, etc., etc. But customer can't switch to the new infrastructure because direct links to the old post, to the old documentation, to the old materials, publish it on the many sources, even on the Wikipedia. And if they change the infrastructure, it means that customer will get the 404 error. I mean, user who connect to the infrastructure. But it means that all type of the request should be checked inside the application. Just imagine that instead of the send just 404 error, application start to look, maybe we have this structure on this database, or this database, or this database. So it's like a switching between different tables, etc., etc. But the percentage of the old request, it's just a 3% of the old requests. All other is the current request because people just open the default web page, front page, and go from the home page anywhere on the site. They're looking the documentation, they're looking the news, etc., directly started. But sometimes from the Google search, from the Wikipedia, from the anywhere, they get the all direct links. But to handle this 3% of the direct links, we are still using a lot of CPU time, a lot of memory time, a lot of database time to handle each request. So how to avoid this? This is like one of the scenario when you have, for example, the error. You can handle the error by the sending directly to the function. You know that the function application function app could be binded by the HTTP request. For example, application gets the request is 4404. It's just redirected to the binded function and forgot about, because it's redirection. We have all requests, we have what we need to handle, etc., etc. And after that, the function can work more slowly, do all of these checks, etc., etc. But it's 5%, 3% then like 100% of each request. And after this restructuring, we got the normal performance for the application, because we got the request, we know that it's the wrong request, we send to the any other part of the any function, etc., and we forgot about this request because we already handled it, and our front-end application, our front-end port ready to answer for the next request. So the most of the customer experience jumped really high after these changes of the infrastructure. Plus again, so like auto healing option is really required, we will talk about. And choosing the right application service plan, choosing the right SKU, it's a really, really important part. I would recommend you to use premium. If you look to the premium SKU instead of what we have here now. Okay, instead of the previous one, the premium SKU has the more CPU power than previous one, and the prices is just duplicated, but at the same time you duplicate your performance, but at the same time you got more modern CPUs, V-cores, right? V2 or right now V3, plus you got more features on inside the premium. We will talk about this, and it's really important to understand that less size. For example, we are using P1 V2 because V3 is not available right now on the UAE North or UAE Central. We're using P1, but from the 4 to 12. It's more effective to handle most of the requests, like 2,000-3,000 requests per minute. It's more effective than have, for example, one P4 than 4 P1. Why? Because again, we handling, if we have some long awaiting operation inside one instance, we have time to use another one, etc., etc. It's more effective on the security cases and attack cases because, for example, if we have HTTP slow attack directly to the instances, it will be the issue that one instance will be crashed directly really fast. 4 instances will spread this request and will mitigate the attack more effectively. Plus, we are using the auto scaling option, and this auto scaling option add us, like, as we lost, for example, 1, 2 first and second instance, but third and fourth still working slowly, but we can add fifth and sixth, seventh, etc., etc., and after that the first and second will be rebooted and will be back. So it's more effective to use more instances than size. Fixing also this scenario, how you exactly can do this with the application services. It's turn on diagnostic settings. Please be aware that's like on the diagnostic settings. On the diagnostic settings, you can turn on a lot of features, a lot of options, a lot of parameters that you can analyze after. You can see a lot of things here. You can turn on additional options on the auto scaling where you can see the diagnostic. It's without the auto scaling, but anyway, you can turn on the diagnostics here. You can use, and you must use application inside to analyze what's going on inside your application. After that, please run stress tests, any stress test, it's fine. Analyze the logs, handle all finded errors, handle all finded delays, etc., etc. Again, move delay, trying to move delay to the delays to the different function, to the atomic operation. If it's possible, how we discussed it before, to move error 404 to the separate, for example, scenario, if it's required to handle. And handle performance peak values to understand what's going on and how we can handle this with auto scaling. So the performance peaks could be auto scaling with the right parameters, with the right options here, manual or auto scaling with required rules, where you can find, this is a small one, it's a bad scenario, but anyway, here you can find the percentage, etc., where you can set that. If it's grade 4, but please aware that you can manage by average, maximum, and minimum. For some kinds of attacks, for some types of attacks, it could be better use not the average but maximum, because, for example, you have attack, this attack spread it fast, this attack is effective DDoS attack, and it means that before, this is a scale for 1 minute, before you will reach your 70% or even 60%, attack will crash all your instances. So in these cases, maybe it will be better to use the maximum. So you see that's the maximum, for example, with some types. A maximum could be jumped in 1 minute. Because we have, for example, 4, 5, 6 instances on the beginning, like a minimum, we can set the 6. Maximum, we can set the 12. It's not possible. It's S. it's 10. And default, for example, 6. What it means default, it means that in case if there is no any metrics, there is no any information from the application about current performance, about current status, application plan will manage this with the default. So nothing knows, no information, so it will be used by 6. But anyway, again, so like you can use this one, you can use the duration for the how long you want to analyze for the maximum, etc. You can use the same operation like increase, cool down, wait for something. Again, for the attacks, cooldown should be a smaller value, but same time again, so like it's better to have P1 and 3 than 3 by P1. Use please health check. It's new feature, really important and really good feature to use with the critical application. You can turn on health check and put some path that you want to check. It could be root, it could be some request to know not only about that's like website is open, but maybe the request to the database that should send back some value, etc. And what will happen? Application plan will check each instance of your application with this path, and if this path will return the 500 error or anything also like 501 2 3 whatever, it will reboot the instance. It's really effective in case of the, for example, attacks, etc., etc. Use this, configure this, and do the more intensive stress test. Check the flapping. Avoid the flapping. What it means flapping? If you put here non-correct and or non-logical, let's say, scenario, like for example for the scale up, scale out one scenario, but same time you can add the scenario how to cool down and decrease the number of your instances. And when you put non-logical, not correct logically or technically triggers, for example, you put to go up, not average, but maximum, but same time you put go down, average, and this average still lower than number of the required average, it will be going down. So it's mean flapping, and this flapping creates like a blinking of your application, and it could be could create a lot of issues and problems here. So please avoid the flapping, and again repeat the test. And even after 1 day, 3 days, 1 week, please continue to review your performance. Please continue to review your application insights. Please continue to review your main diagnostic settings. And diagnostic, it's why we need to talk with the diagnostic. It's like diagnostic or log analytics. You can use the trends and forecasts inside the custom requests. It will be your basic tool. We will talk about these basic tools. Third part of the application service after the migration, after creating, it's the security. What Microsoft says about the security of the application services. Microsoft says that please look for this documentation and go with this guidance. We are not responsible. We have no obligation. You have security obligation to protect your application. So no protection from Microsoft side. Let's be frankly saying, like, open it. Microsoft says that yes, we will provide you tools for identity protection, but you have to realize it. We will provide you tools for the application, but you need to realize these tools. We will provide you tools for network controls, but you need to realize this. We will just protect your operation system, hosts, etc., etc. So the level of the protection of the operation system, where your application service based, is Microsoft responsibility. All about network access to your application. All about application itself, all about the identity and go up. It's all about your responsibility. So what you have to do? First one, you have to go through the full Microsoft documentation and recommendation. So this is the first one. This is the second one. This is the first one. It's exactly where you have this quote. And what you have to do. This one, it's more detailed about path security and about deployment, about database, etc. Please go really careful. Same time, for the security, you have to use, and it's again the compromise between your money and your security or your performance. It's Azure Service. Azure Security Center. Each service for you, each application service to monitor will cost you $15 per month. So if you have 25, for example, different application services inside your solution, you will pay about $350 per month just for security. But you need to understand that with this service, you will have application defender, you will have alerts, you will have a recommendation, you will have policy, etc., etc. Please deploy application gateway with WAF version 2. Please deploy WAF policy for CDN and for the WAF itself. Please choose right configuration for your VNet integration or private endpoint. Choose SQL database private endpoints. And there is a main question about the DDoS. On the VNet, there is the options named DDoS. If your application does not connect to the VNet, this option will not work. But in case of you use the VNet integration, you use the application gateway, you will use the VNet, and you can turn on the DDoS from the basic to standard with $3,000 per month. But it will protect your VNet up to 100 VNets. It will protect your VNets from the DDoS attacks more effective than basic scenarios that's included inside the application gateway, etc., etc. So this is your turn to decide. About VNet integration and endpoints, you need to understand that there is a two different technology with two different prices. How you can integrate your VNet application with VNets and what you need to achieve with this integration. First one, you need to understand that either VNet or endpoint, it gives you ability to isolate the traffic from or to your application services. So this is like additional step for the security. It's help you to avoid any high latency issue with the SQL, etc., etc. But anyway, your network integration and your network strategy should be avoided. So basically, it will looks like this one or something like this, where you have application gateway, where you have connectivity, where you have points to connect to your application, or how your application connect to the resources. So VNet integrations means that your application will connect by VNet to any other resources. Private point means that you can publish inside any subnet, inside any VNets, inside any region around the world, the connection point, private connection point with private IP, and any application around this will be able to connect. So like combining, for example, VNet integration for the application with private endpoint for the SQL server, we exactly can avoid the high latency, because in this case, application will connect to the SQL server by the from the private VNet to the private endpoint, and you will not publish either application or SQL server. There is a lot of limitation or additional requirements, etc., etc. Plus, you need to understand that you have to pay, for example, for the private endpoints connection and the traffic between these connections, etc. But again, this is the best scenario that should be reviewed, and we recommend it. And additional things that you need to understand, that when you publish one application inside one VNet subnet in Azure, it means that this subnet will be provided, fully provided for the application. And the size of the subnet should be the same size as your number or planet number of the application instances. We are talking about the integration. So it means that each application instance will have its own VNet IP inside the selected subnet, and will be possible to connect from this IP to any resources inside this network. But please be aware that's like a SMB connection. It's not available, or joining to the domain or connect to the domain. It's also, I mean, Active Directory domain. It's also not be possible. But again, it's a big step to provide more faster solution and more secure solution. Same time for the endpoints. When we are talking about the endpoint, it's more about how your application, another application, will connect to this application. So, for example, we have application gateway somewhere. We have application somewhere not on the internet, but we can turn on private endpoint. It means that all traffic will come through the front end from application gateway. Application will turn off any direct public connectivity points from its side. So no one will not be able to connect to this application by direct public IP with direct name, only over this internet connectivity. Application gateway and web application firewall must have. Why? Because first one is secure your public endpoint for any application. Even without the public endpoint, you can block the connectivity to the application from the public IPs, or allow connectivity only from the public IPs that you know for your developers, etc., etc. Over the testing perspective, any other connection will go through the application gateway, and check there with the application firewall, web application firewall, and additional web application policy. Why it's two different scenarios? Because WAF itself for application gateway use a WASP protection and a WASP rules to analyze headers, to analyze the request, to analyze the trust, etc., etc. for the attack. For example, it can find that you use three different browsers to connect to one site over the application gateway with different credentials, and your connectivity will be blocked. It will say that you are trying to do the attack by overwriting your connectivity and escalating your rights. It's how the WAF works. But unfortunately for the WAF, It's not possible to set the standard rules or standard policies like I don't want to provide the connectivity from these IPs, or I want to allow the connectivity only from these IPs. So this is named WAF policies. This is additional to web application firewall itself. But you need to train, we will talk about this. Again, additional things like optimization your application infrastructure. You can do the URL based routing based on the different requests. You can forward this request to the different application instances, different application itself, different application plans, etc., etc. You can host multiply sites. You can do the different redirection. You can customize again error pages. So you even don't need to do this like we discussed before, error handling by the application. You can send directly request to the some Azure function, etc., to work on it. This is the okay. I'm saying that we are out of time. Sorry. This is the review headers that you can write headers that, or URLs to work with it. You can optimize the performance with SSL of offloading. So you can use the application firewall for the application gateway for the SSL offloading. You can use WebSockets or HTTP2 traffic. You can use the auto scaling and connection draining. All of this optimize your performance. But you need to understand, and you need to look on it that there is a limitation of the number of the listeners. There is a big gap and big issue for the WAF. You need to know that if you use the public and private IP with the same port, it's not possible. For example, I mean that, for example, I use the WAF to publish some application, but from one point I publish the application to the internet like a public part, but CMS part I'm publishing over the private IP for site-to-site VPN between the on-premise customer on-premise network and Azure network. And if I want to use 443 port for both, it's not possible. For both, I mean private and public IP. This is a big limitation. Rewrite available only on V2. WAF policies available only on the V2. If you are planning to use V2, you need to know that's like it's available only on the UAE Central. On UAE North data center, V2 still not available, unfortunately. So please do not turn on WAF in prevention mode, or especially on the prod environment, because WAF block a lot. It's fine anywhere. It's fine, for example, inside the Confluence, inside the Jira. Anywhere, it's fine the SQL injection, it's fine the script XRS, etc., cross-script execution, anything. So you need to turn off WAF on the detection mode. You need to turn on the diagnostic and look to the diagnostic, analyze the diagnostic, analyze what was blocked, and after that, turn on this stuff. You have to understand that the auto scaling, yes, it exists inside the application gateway, and it's not okay to avoid some massive DDoS attack. If you have massive DDoS attack, I mean, for example, we found about 10,000 points, different connection that's trying to kill the website with the WAF. We found that's like WAF should have at least 6-8 instances to avoid this attack and have the time to add additional instances. And you need to check. After you check your application, the same way you have to do a lot of stress tests, a lot of HTTP slow attacks, etc., to analyze your WAF configuration and understand that, for example, these 6 nodes will help you to protect against attacks, because 6 nodes, it's enough to have at least 16,000 connections per second. And again, so this is a balance, this is a compromise between attacks and between price and performance and stability, high availability, etc. You have to understand that portal config will not work. Never use the portal config in application gateway in production. Why? Because when you change something inside the WAF, you need to do this one by one. Because when you change, the configuration will be applied. When you try to change next part of the configuration and press save, it says that right now we are applying, and next request will be ignored. So please do this by scripting. You will, trust me, you will really fast find how to script, how to change the WAF, etc., etc. And again, Log Analytic and Castor will be your main tool to work. And we are going to the fourth part of the changing of your application in the Azure. So monitoring, must have. You must have application inside for each application, even in production, to understand, to avoid, to look on it, etc. You have to turn on diagnostic settings for each object that you need. This is the diagnostic settings. We will return to this slide next. It's exactly what we are talking about. You must have alerts for application scaling. It's possible. You will find the application here, notify, and you can configure if you have the system. At the same time, you will need to have alerts, for example, for the WAF. On the WAF, we have no time, sorry. On the WAF, this is a really cool alert where you can measure, for example, the number of your beacons, and the number is less than 100%. You can raise the alert or react on this alert to check what's happened with your application, to start, for example, auto healing, etc., etc. Same time, for the alerts, you can track and check the situation with the current attack, because inside the alerts you can find the options like additional just a second, you see this alerts, additional, yeah, analysis. Look how the condition looks like. This is to say that in case if last 5 minutes we have dynamic, not static, dynamic alerts, it means that this is the current trend. This is the trend that's threshold sensitivity. So for now, the situation based on the analytic inside the Azure, based the analytic for this, exactly this instance of the application gateway, I say medium. It means that if the number of the connection will be go up to 21, looks like something happens, because typical scenario is this one. Or I can say the high, you see it's more sensitivity and less connectivity, less number. Or I can say the low, so like 23, and each this request analyzed by Azure and worked by Azure. And again, you can start the sending email, run the application, etc., etc., or scripts to do the auto healing, or turn on more aggressive reaction inside the application gateway itself. there is also paranoid level of the connectivities and protection. This is how it works. So this is a really important part of the alerts must have, right? Plus, alerts and analytic can help you to redefine auto-scaling itself. I give you some example. Health check for application, must have. And Castor is your Wunderwaffe. Wunderwaffe, it's super super armor, super weapon. Castor, it's a language that gives you ability not only to do some easiest request, you can also do like this. Look, what we have here, we have the typical request to the log inside the application gateway. I am asking about the application gateway, and I am asking not about the blocked but allowed request. And I do the next. I ask for what will happen in 10 days with the 1 hour perspective, and I can find that typical number of the request was here, and the trend is going up. I have the script that automates this, analyze this, and when this difference will be, for example, for 1 day, the difference will be on the prediction will be more than 10%. It will automatically auto-scale application gateway itself. So it means that we are going up, we have more requests, something happened and the request going up, and the request for next day will be on 10% bigger than today. We will add additional instance. Same for the delete additional basic instance. So we are not talking about auto-scaling. We are talking about the number of the basic instances of the application gateway itself. So we can manipulate this by the Castor. And we have the scripts. If you look for the PowerShell scripts, if you know about the automation runbooks, it's your superpower. And we have the for the meetup, previous Azure UAE Meetup, we have the presentation about automating Azure infrastructure monitoring with log analytic, Castor, and PowerShell. You will find this presentation, and this presentation, for example, provide you idea how it exactly. Oops, so I don't know what is this. I mean this product, but you can see just a second the full code of this script that's run automatically and do. It's not. Could be not even Azure Power script or Azure Automation Power script. It will be the script that will run from your machine, from any other options, etc., and work with your analytics, connect again to the some log analytics, connect to the some services in Azure, and do changes. It's not exactly like a application. It's for reporting, for changes, something, etc. Please look this. This presentation, it's really helpful. We are using a lot of this script, exactly like this trend, and this request was given exactly from the same script, just to analyze, to get the data and understand what's going on. And yes, we are out of time. This is a table of the all features that you can use for the Azure Web Application to meet customer requirements or your requirements, how to work with, how to avoid, how to store data, protect data, analyze your system. And if you have any questions, please ask. So like this is a important question about the front door or application gateway. If we are planning to use the application only in one region and we are not planning to use or application, you have to understand that application not ready, for example, for the multi-region configuration, because front door, it means that you are planning to have different regions. You are planning to have the data replication. You are planning to have some analysis, what is region active, what is not, etc. And put here front door, traffic manager, whatever. Yes, so this is the front door. But if we are talking about one region and application are not ready, you don't want to pay for the replicas, etc., or you even can't do this. For example, like in some limitation between UAE North and UAE Central. Yeah, so like we don't need this. And in my experience, I remember three significant issue with the region itself. In my 10 years experience in Azure, three significant issues. Last one was was with the concrete regions that I work. Last one, it was a year ago when UAE North was overloaded. And if you stop virtual machine, you can't start it. So we create the scripts for the customer, and the scripts like start, and after 3 hours, virtual machine was started. This was the issue. But frankly saying, it's not like really required to use the front door to work with the solution. If you have this idea, if you have it, yeah, you need front door. By the way, it should be on the documentation. Let's see. Azure door vs application gateway. Yep. I think if we look on it, so it's like again, so two different choices. Which one, front door or application gateway? Yeah, you see. It depends of your solution, and are you planning to have the different regions, etc. But again, your application should be prepared. Any other questions? Sorry, colleagues, it's quite delay, but I told Tarek before that's like I will need 1 hour. Please ask your question. I think this presentation will be shared by the team. And you can find all these links. Please add to the LinkedIn connection, no issue. I add anyone who asks for the connection. If it's a real account, of course. No question. Tarek? Okay. Thanks a lot for the joining. Thanks a lot. Sorry for this long session. Hope it was helpful for you, and you find a lot of steps that should be done after you just code your website and started. And please take attention in some solution, etc. Okay. No one. Thank you. Have a nice evening, and please join to our community too. I will. Oops, where is it? Where's my slides? Please join to our community too. You can take this QR code. for the further presentations. And see you again. Next presentation will be really interesting too, trust me. Not mine, but I know the guys who will provide the next one.